Humanist Celebrants, making ritual right. Hello and welcome to the Humanist Celebrant podcast. My name's Simon Smith, and as usual I'm joined by one of my colleagues from Humanists UK to talk about their life, their work as a celebrant. Today I'm joined by Felicity Harvest, based in East Sussex in Wadhurst. She's been a celebrant for some 9 years and has conducted some 400 weddings and funerals and namings. Felicity, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Simon. Hello.
So 400 odd ceremonies, that's a huge amount of experience. Do you feel like you're getting better at it?
Yeah, every ceremony I do, because you're always learning. You learn from every ceremony, and everyone's different, but everyone's informed by the ones you've done before.
Let's go right back to the beginning of your work in this area. Why did you become a humanist celebrant? And was it important that you were a humanist celebrant as opposed to just being a celebrant?
Yeah, absolutely. First, if I could talk about how I discovered I was a humanist. It was 30 odd years ago when my daughter was born. We decided to have a naming for her, since both myself and her father weren't religious. And somebody said to me, I think the British Humanist Association, as they were then, have just published a book on naming. So I bought it and I looked at it. And we didn't use them. We did the ceremony ourselves, probably quite badly. But when I read the booklet, I thought, I'm a humanist. I was brought up an atheist, but I never liked defining myself by a negative. And when I discovered about humanism, I just thought, right, that's who I am. So I joined what was then the British Humanist Association, what's now Humanist UK. And we had humanist funerals for various family members. And when my husband and I got married, we had a humanist wedding. And then 10 years ago, I was lucky enough to be made redundant. And I thought, I know what I want to do now. I've seen some really terrible ceremonies and I've seen some really wonderful ceremonies. And the ones that have been wonderful are the ones that have been informed by humanism and informed by the lives of the people who the ceremonies were for. And that was it.
Well, let's pick up on that then. So, bad ceremonies and good ceremonies. What, for you, Felicity, makes for a good ceremony? Let's talk about funerals to start with.
Yes, we'll talk about funerals. So the principles are much the same for any ceremony. But at funerals, that the person whose life is being commemorated and celebrated is at the centre of that funeral. That it's about them, that it's what they would have wanted, it's what their nearest and dearest would have wanted, and it's informed by their beliefs and really sticks to their beliefs. I talked about bad funerals. They're the ones that don't do that maybe put some ideology or belief to the front and put the person to the back. And I don't like that.
Quite often people come to a ceremony. I'm thinking about families coming to a ceremony and they don't really perhaps know what they want. They might be in grief. They'll be in a certain amount of chaos, presumably. They'll have all manner of things to sort out. What do you do with clients in order to help them to use the time in a ceremony effectively?
Okay. Well, the first thing is to be confident and getting people to be confident. There's a terrifying statistic that people only take in 7% of what they hear when they go to a funeral director to begin to organise a funeral. So that means that when we as celebrants turn up to meet them, they probably have no idea what they need to think about. They have no idea what decisions they need to take. And for helping them to feel confident in knowing what those decisions are and making them is the first step in the process. It's incredibly important to be empathetic, to listen, to hear what they are really saying, to persuade them to say more, because people are sometimes quite reticent. And actually, most people don't go to many funerals, and they certainly don't go to any humanist funerals. And to know what the possibilities are is really, really important. So sometimes I get people, telling a funny story and then saying, oh, but you can't talk about that, and I'm saying, well, You know, wouldn't people like to hear about that? Um, I remember one in particular. That was a guy who had a checkered life, and his children's memories were of things like hawking stolen leather jackets around street markets and things like this. um, and yeah, he was quite a colourful character. Well, that was it. And I was asked to speak to one of his mates, and I spoke to this mate, and he said, and got a few quotes from him, and he said, "Well, actually, to be honest, he was a rogue, wasn't he? but you can't say that in a funeral." And I said, "Why not?" And at the point at which I told this story, told about talking to Ron, and I said, and Ron said, "He's a rogue." And he was a rogue, and the whole creme just relaxed and smiled and laughed. And, everybody, it would have been dishonest not to say that. So getting people to really talk about the truth. Sometimes people don't want to. I mean, there's people, particularly I find older men, are inclined to say, "Oh, she was a very private person. She wouldn't really like, all this to be described." And you have to go with that if that's the feeling. But on the whole, everybody's got a good story to tell, and getting those stories out there and using them, I think, is incredibly important.
One of the questions I think is really interesting when discussing funerals with families is that thing about, and you've touched on it, that thing about authenticity. It's about somehow making the life of the person who's died feel real to the people who were there without it sounding disingenuous or...
Yes, I mean, authenticity is absolutely important. Sometimes, as I say, it's partly about giving people confidence they can talk about anything. And of course, if they tell me something they don't want me to use, I can not use it, but encouraging people to say more. Quite often it's about if you're in the home of a deceased, which sadly we're not really able to be at the moment, the things you see around you can be immensely revealing. I did one for a guy, and it was a very interesting story anyway, because he was an upholsterer to the stars. But his hall, long, thin Victorian hall, was absolutely covered with paintings of pugs. And I was talking to his housemate and his brother, and nobody mentioned pugs. And it's that kind of thing that you say, "And the pugs?" And suddenly a whole load of news stories come rushing out. Yeah. So giving people permission to talk about their loved one, giving them the right to say, "Ooh, we'll cut that bit" if they need to. But yes, it's part of, so many people have said to me that conversation was a hugely important part of the grieving process, because it was the first time, really, probably since the death, that they'd had the opportunity to talk positively about their loved one, rather than talking about choosing coffins or whatever.
That's something that I've found in my own practice as a celebrant is that opportunity that you're giving people to speak about somebody with a stranger, because quite often we're strangers to the families, and encouraging them and allowing them to speak openly and with humour and love about the deceased. And people go, "Oh, it's been great. It's been great just talking about her, just telling you about her. It's been really great."
Absolutely. Yep. It's one of the privileges of the job. You just hear about so many fascinating lives. And of course, the other thing we offer as humanists, which I'm incredibly enthusiastic about, is our archive, and the fact that these stories can be placed on record for researchers and future generations to see the lives of people who died and weren't religious at the beginning of the 21st century. I think that is a fantastic resource.
It's a great collection of stories.
Yeah.
A couple of more practical things. I'm hoping that these podcasts will be useful for people who are perhaps, in the process of planning a ceremony, planning a funeral, and seeking some inspiration or at least a little bit of reassurance. I want to ask you a couple of really practical things. What's your favourite reading for a funeral? And I know that everyone will be unique to the person who's perhaps died, but as celebrants, we might all have something that we go to because it sums up.
Yeah. Well, I know I've got many things that I go to, and if you could see me in my office, my shelves are completely laden with poetry books, mostly bought in charity shops that I just love looking through, and they're all stuffed with bits of paper because I see things and I think one day I'll do a funeral for somebody and that will be exactly the right poem. But my favourite at the moment is one I used last Thursday in a really small, socially distanced memorial on Eastbourne Beach, right down by the sea. And it was perfect for the person who we were remembering. And it's actually become one to put in the file as a poem I would like read at my own funeral.
Oh, that's a thought. Would you read me a little?
Yes, I will. It's called As I Grow Old, I Will March, Not Shuffle. And it's by Brian Bilston. And it goes, as I grow old, I will not shuffle to the beat of self-interest and make that slow retreat to the right. I will be a septuagenarian insurrectionist marching with the kids. I shall sing La Marseillaise while brandishing homemade placards that proclaim down with this sort of thing. I will be an octogenarian obstructionist and build unscalable barricades from bottles of flat lemonade, tartan blankets, and chicken fire. I will hurl prejudice upon the brazier's fire. I will be a nonagerian nonconformist, armed with a ballpoint pen and a hand that shakes with rage, not age, at politicians' latest crimes, in strongly worded letters to the Times. I will be a centenarian centurion and allow injustice no admittance. I will stage long-standing sit-ins. My mobility scooter and I will move for no one. And when I die, I will be the scattered ashes that attach themselves to the lashes and blind the eyes of racists and of fascists.
That's a fantastic reading. Thank you so much. And knowing you as I do, Felicity, I can see that's a very appropriate piece of writing.
Yep.
Oh, fantastic. And then finally, music is so important in ceremonies. We as celebrants are quite often asked to play pieces of music that become familiar because they're quite frequently chosen, but occasionally you get one that just sparkles and you go, oh, that's just so perfect. And quite often the pieces of music that you or I might never have heard. Can you recall a piece of music?
I can, and it was a piece of music I had heard, but I had never thought of using for a funeral. Older woman in her 90s, didn't sleep very much and listened to Radio 4 from farming today in the morning to the shipping forecast at night. And the piece of music they chose was, of course, the theme tune to the shipping forecast, Sailing By. And it was so perfect. It was absolutely perfect. It was absolutely her. And lovely that we used it for the reflection, and it was just lovely to sit and listen to.
Felicity, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me this afternoon. Best of luck with your practice.
Thank you. My pleasure. And with yours.
I don't know about you, but Sailing By just makes me want to drop off. My sincere thanks to Felicity Harvest for taking part in the podcast this week. If you're living in the East Sussex area of the UK and looking for somebody to conduct a wedding, a funeral or naming for you, I can't think of anybody better, more inspiring or more creative to do it for you. Thanks again, Felicity, for taking part. All the details of the poetry and the music that Felicity chose for the podcast has been added to the links. If you want to get hold of myself, please do find us on the humanism.org.uk website, where you'll find details of all Humanist UK celebrants all around the country. If you've got questions or thoughts or ideas that you'd like us to discuss, please do get in touch. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another Humanists UK celebrant discussing their work and how to make ritual right.